Okay, so now that we have discussed setting and character and setting and mood and setting and tone, our last bit of work here is to discuss setting and theme. So what we've got here are two separate descriptions of setting from The Great Gatsby. We're going to go back to the first one we looked at here. And I'm asking you this time to look for patterns in the description of the setting. What types of things do you notice emerging from excerpt to excerpt, and where does that leave us? So, rereading this one. There was music from my neighbor's house through the summer nights. In his blue gardens, men and girls came and went like moths among the whisperings and the champagne and the stars. At high tide in the afternoon, I watched his guests diving from the tower of his raft or taking the sun on the hot sand of his beach while his two motorboats slit the waters of the Sound, drawing aquaplanes over cataracts of foam. On weekends, his Rolls-Royce became an omnibus, bearing parties to and from the city between 9 in the morning and long past midnight, while his station wagon scampered like a brisk yellow bug to meet all trains. And on Mondays, 8 servants, including an extra gardener, toiled all day with mops and scrubbing brushes and hammers and garden shears, repairing the ravages of the night before. Okay, so my question to you was, what do we see repeating between this excerpt and the next one that we've got to look at? So let's just go to that other part and find that here. Okay, so in chapter 2, the description of setting goes like this. About halfway between West Egg, and that's where Gatsby and the narrator live, and New York, the motor road hastily joins the railroad and runs beside it for a quarter of a mile, so as to shrink away from a certain desolate area of land. This is a valley of ashes, a fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and hills and grotesque gardens, where ashes take the forms of houses and chimneys and rising smoke, and finally, with a transcendent effort, of men who move dimly and already crumbling through the powdery air. I think it's worth it to pause there for a moment and note just how much contrast there is between this description of a setting of where people live and the description of Gatsby's house. Here we have people made of ashes, and the word ashes is repeated over and over again. It's very different from the description of the people in the Rolls Royces and the pools and the beaches. Okay, going on. Occasionally, a line of gray cars crawls along an invisible track, gives out a ghastly creak, and comes to rest, and immediately the ash-gray men swarm up with leaden spades and stir up an impenetrable cloud which screens their obscure operations from your sight. That sentence has a whole lot going on in it. First of all, we have cars again, but not Rolls Royces. We have people coming up out of the ash with their tools, which for me really recalls in that previous description the 8 servants who toiled with their mops and scrubbing brushes and hammers and shears. That description of their tools is again repeated here with these men who come up out of the ashes with their spades. And in the previous excerpt, what they're doing is they're repairing the ravages of the night before, of all of the partying that went on. They're fixing things that people messed up during the party. Whereas here, what they're doing is called obscure operations, which makes it seem like we're not meant to know exactly what they're doing to these cars, but maybe that's because those people who are fixing the cars have a different set of knowledge than the people who are watching them. So, again, we've got some contrast going on. Continuing, but above the gray land, and the spasms of bleak dust which drift endlessly over it, you perceive after a moment the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. Wait, what? The eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg are blue and gigantic. Who is this guy? Their irises are 1 yard high. Okay, that's strange. They look out of no face, but instead from a pair of enormous yellow spectacles, which pass over a non-existent nose. Evidently, some wild wag of an oculist, okay, that's like a guy who helps you with your glasses, set them there to fatten his practice in the borough of Queens. Okay, this is an advertisement. It's a billboard for his business. And then sank down himself into eternal blindness. Okay, so maybe this guy who was a doctor of eyes is not practicing anymore. But the billboard is still there. Or forgot them and moved away. But his eyes, dimmed a little by many paintless days, under sun and rain, brood on over the solemn dumping ground. Ooh, it's a dumping ground there. And this guy's eyes that are like not even a part of a body are watching everything. It's kind of creepy. And so we're going back to mood there a little bit with the description. But here, again, we're looking at some contrast. We've got description of the way the rich live. We've got description of how the poor live. And here you can see that this repetition, this continual going back to this idea is the building of a motif. We've got a topic emerging, rich versus poor. Do we know how it ties into theme? Well, probably not without reading the book and getting a grasp of the conflict and how it plays out through the characters. But the fact that the description keeps coming back to these contrasts seems important and seems to be helping us to grasp a motif that can lead us to making a determination about theme. So again, to summarize, setting is so much more than place and time. It can actually do quite a lot for a writer to communicate ideas throughout a narrative.